The Mazda challenge is far from over. Terry Shield with a 53.4 seconds sits on pole position for today's round of the CRC Amscar Series. Well, you're threatened to start pole position for a couple of races, but getting off from the start has been a problem.
That is my biggest problem, Mike. I'm probably the world's worst at starting. I hope today I can get it all together and get away before the rest of them.
Okay, you've seen Alan Grice in the earlier races. The V8s are running fairly strongly, but you've got a 3/100ths of a second buffer over the first of the Commodores. Is that enough to win over the distance of 25 laps?
It's enough to get your pole position. The race, I think, is a different story entirely. We've got to get to the top of the corner first, try and get a break between us and maintain that break the whole distance.
Well, Barry Jones has been starting alongside of you in most of the Mazda races this season, isn't he? Alan Moffat's away, so you're really holding the Mazda flag one out this afternoon.
Well, I hope we can do just as good a job as what Alan Moffat did last meeting and bring him home first.
I was interested to hear recently the comments of Alan Jones regarding the eligibility of Mazda's running in the touring car category by claiming that they were GT cars and shouldn't be competing against Australian touring cars. Your reaction?
I think if he feels that these cars have an advantage, maybe he should build a Mazda instead of a Falcon.
I suppose it's pretty easy to say they're driving a turbo Porsche as well.
That's true, yeah.
You're obviously satisfied with the way your preparation has come on this season, and looking ahead to the James Hardy 1000 Classic, just how much of a challenge is the Mazda going to be at Bathurst this year?
I think they'll be a really big threat, Mike, especially towards the end of the day when most of the bigger cars will have slowed up. The little Mazdas will still be going, and the boys have put a lot of work into this car to bring it up to what it is now. And thanks to our new sponsor, Eurocars, we're looking really good for the rest of the year.
We hope also looking very good this afternoon. Terry Shield, one of the big chances, sitting on pole position for the Better Breaks CRC Amscar round.
Cars warming up at the moment. It's Jim Richards in the BMW 635. Beautiful looking machine. Handicapped by being required to run with an excessive amount of weight under the rules which apply to touring car events. But even so, he's on the front row of the grid in this race. He might find it a little hard to get off with the same pace as Terry Shield in the much lighter Mazda, which both has a great deal of power and an enormous advantage in weight. Shield now just bringing his Mazda, the Eurocars car, up to the start line. Will start from pole position. Terry Shield recorded a 53.4. And Jim Richards alongside him in a day of practice yesterday, which was made rather strange by rain, so it was dry in some sessions and wet in others. His time was 54.7 in the BMW. Jim Richards, who has won the last 3 Bathursts as co-driver for Peter Brock, running for BMW now, and he and David Hobbs will team up together at Bathurst this year. There'll be 2 BMWs, by the way, before we just run back through the field, with some interesting drivers in them, which I'll tell you a little bit later on. Let's just go through the field first of all, because we've got Fred Gibson behind him in the turbocharged Nissan Bluebird in car 56. Car 40, Peter McLeod in the second of the Mazda RX-7s. On the next row, George Fury, another of the turbocharged Nissan Bluebirds, 55, and John Duggan alongside him in an RX-7. Ross Burbridge is behind, and Les Gross, RX-7 and Capri. Bob Holden, the perennial runner here, who's getting faster and faster in an Escort, and Tony Kavich in RX-7. Wally Scott Celica, Bob Scott Escort, Phil Alexander in an RX-7, last man on the grid. There are 13 starters, 10 laps. The flag is about to drop.
Ready for the start. They're racing and getting away very smartly. That time was Jim Richards. Terry Shield, by his own admission, not the world's best starter, but he selects another gear and gets away even quicker heading up Pitcher Hill for the first time. Gaggle of Capri's back behind them, but it's Shield who leads for the first time down into Dunlop. Richards dropping very smartly into second place, and Gibson up very, very quickly indeed in the Nissan Turbo as they go through Dunlop and work down towards Mazda Corner.
The 2 Bluebird Turbos trying to run nose to tail. George Fury, though, has a Mazda between him and his teammate. Jim Richards going very hard. He lost the start, which he probably expected because of the greater weight, but look at the way he's flinging that black car around. Oh, one of the Capris there braked very late. You can see there how Les Gross went wide. He has to let the field go by before he can rejoin the race, and he'll be cursing himself, and yet be thankful that there is another race in which he can have a go and maybe get it all right. Oh, and it's 3 abreast there, and one of the Bluebirds just did a little bit of de-trimming of the car that cut off the ground in front, lightened the load of the tail of the car behind. Much tail wagging going on there. Jim Richards still in second place. Challenges are plenty though back in the field. 2 RX-7s side by side up the hill. One in the front of the race. Terry Shield, Freddie Gibson there in third place. And the field pouring through. 10 laps of the race. They've covered 2 so far on their second lap.
There's Terry Shield running away with it in the Eurocar's Valvoline Mazda RX-7, Jim Richards. Of course, in the John Player BMW, holding down second place. They've cleared out by perhaps all 50 metres. Most of the action still back in the pack as they come through Honda Corner and head down towards Winfield Turner. There you can see that group of cars that have been providing with most of the action heading down to the right-hander at Winfield. And here they come down into the right-hander at the moment. Peter McLeod in amongst them in the Strongbow entry. Very much sideways there.
3 Mazdas and 1 Bluebird with George Fury car. Look at the challenge, by the way, for second place. Freddie Gibson there, just following this car. Now that's Jimmy Richards, a great driver of today. Freddie Gibson, some people say a great driver of yesterday, but he's got a wily old head and he can still go very hard. Been absolutely priceless to Nissan in developing this car, and he is certainly closing up on the BMW in some parts of this circuit. You just watch the way he tries to make up ground through here. Freddie Gibson after Jim Richards. Richards in the black car, Gibson in the white. It's turbocharged 1.8 litres against non-turbocharged 3.5 litre 6-cylinder. Europe versus Japan. Richards wags the tail a bit, but there's no doubt that the Bluebird is closing up. He gets a lot of power out of the corners here. Watch the way this turbocharged car flies as they come down towards Winfield.
Into the right-hander at Winfield, Jim Richards. Freddie Gibson very, very close indeed. Up to Wonderlic Windows turn and then back on the CRC straight. Then back behind them, John Duggan, and they were then tailed by Peter McLeod in the Strongbow RX-7. Again, this dice for second place still continues between Jim Richards and, of course, Gibson as they go over and head down once again into Dunlop Loop. He's certainly keeping Jimmy Richards honest in this one.
Yes, Richards trying very hard. Richards is a great driver. I've said it many times. He really is a superb driver. Maybe underrated. He's a very modest man, and that probably hasn't helped his career. But he can drive anything, and he drives it well. There's the leader, Terry Shield, who's out in front and doing it all the right way. He has himself quite a long lead at the moment. A distance of something like 200 metres over the second car, which is Jim Richards in 31. Who still has Freddie Gibson right behind him. But there's Terry Shield in the peripheral port rotary Mazda. He'll be a real threat for Bathurst this year. There's no doubt these cars are suddenly putting some life back into the James Hardy. My goodness me, he almost took a bit of life out of the fence. He came in very close. Our brave cameraman stayed there. And the others aren't getting any further away. I hope you're still at home sitting in your chairs comfortably and not jumping out as they go so close. You can see the sort of battle going on here with this fourth place group. It's all Mazdas and 1 turbocharged car with George Fury, the well-named rally driver, caught up in the middle there. He's coming in hard. This will be a difficult corner. Fury takes second place there. McLeod still in the lead. And tailing the bunch is Tony Cabbage in car 30.
John Duggan getting a little tap as they came out of that corner, so McLeod now advances up one spot. He was trying to rid himself of some of those cars earlier, but he's still to survive a challenge from perhaps George Fury as this race progresses.
Fury closing a little bit there. The Mazda spitting the typical flame of the rotary engine. We'll also see flame from the turbo of Fury, so 2 unusual cars there. Again, a spit of flame from the back of McLeod's car. They've covered 5 laps.
They've reached half distance now, and the race is certainly alive with interest for second place. There's our race leader running away from it. And by goodness me, we look forward to a great scrap later in the day in the 25-lap Better Break CRC Amscar final between Terry Shield in 37 and, of course, Alan Grice in the Recar Commodore. He runs away with this one, the 10-lap heat for the smaller capacity cars. Jim Richards still holding second in the JPS BMW, and third place being held down by fearless Fred Gibson, of course, in the Nissan Turbo.
I think Jim Richards might have opened up a slight lead over Freddie compared to the past, but it's only fractional. You can see there, they're still well within sight of each other. Maybe, 4 car lengths, no more than that. Richards holding him instead. Richards will have another car, I believe, for Bathurst. It should be lighter, hopefully, and a bit more powerful. BMW, I know, do feel they've been handicapped out of the race, but they're still running 2 cars at Bathurst. The other one, the young driver Stephen Brook, who's made his name in Formula Ford and also in series production in the Perrier RX-7. It's a great opportunity which Frank Gardner, the team manager, is giving Stephen Brook. And his co-driver will be the former world champion Denny Hulme from New Zealand, who is semi-retired but turns up in New Zealand races, the Benson and Hedges Classic, which is the equivalent of our James Hardy race, and has won a few of those. So it'll be an interesting combination of youth and experience in the second of the 2 BMWs to be running at Bathurst this year. Jimmy Richards running with David Hobbs, the English driver who's resident in America, and that'll be a very experienced pair and put them down as one of the cars that will certainly be in contention for Bathurst. And also, look at this Bluebird Turbo. It's a small car, the drivers say, well, we can't win the race, but they're trying to win it. I'm sure they're doing a lot of developmental work to get these cars up. Howard Marsden, the team manager, was telling me last year, a point most people didn't realise, was that these cars, the turbocharged Bluebirds, the only turbocharged cars running in touring car racing, were doing 170 miles an hour down the straight, the same as Dick Johnson's Falcon. So they're quick.
It's enough to take your breath away on Conrod Straight. And meanwhile, this scrap continues because Fred Gibson is back on the bumper of Jim Richards again, down into Dunlop. That's how close he is this time. He was a little back behind him, perhaps 10 or 15 metres last lap around, and Richards has his hands full here with a very alert Freddie Gibson, who is all over him like a wet blanket, heading down to Mazda corner again, now down to the short straight that takes them into the tight left-hander at Honda. And again, you can see Gibson close up. You wouldn't want to close up much more than that. That's NASCAR drafting. Now down the short straight to the right-hander at Winfield, and Freddie Gibson very, very close indeed to Jim Richards and the JPS BMW.
2 laps to go, Mike, and you'll be sure that Fred Gibson will look for a move to try and do a swinging pass. He hasn't quite got the same low-speed punch that the 6-cylinder BMW would have. He's got to keep his revs up, and he'll be looking for a high-speed part of the circuit to pass, maybe the top of the mountain, where they're now heading. Up Pitcher Pave, maybe Dunlop Loop is where Fred Gibson will try his move. He has 2 laps to do it in. He'll certainly make a move this time if he possibly can. Will Richards give him room?
Well, Jim closes the door a little, and Jim was actually on the brakes a little early that time up the hill. I think that took care of Fred's challenge, but Fred nibbles away at the inside, says, well, this could be it. Let's give her a shot.
He's putting his nose out there. Richard, though, just gets far enough in front to close the door. He takes the line through Mazda, down towards Honda. Richard's pulling away. Gibson will have to close up. He can't afford to drop more than half a length back further than that. He's got to stay close. And Freddie Gibson punching it hard. He keeps it fast through there. He keeps the revs up. The turbos going hard here. He'll try and get under brakes, but the brakes on the BMW are magnificent. They'll only have 1 lap to go after. Oh, he's had a slight touch there. You see a bit of fiberglass move, maybe from the front of the Bluebird. I think he's lost a bit of a spoiler, but he's through. He's on the inside. No, Richard says, no, thank you. I'm going to hold on to that line. And Richard hangs on. They're both touched. That's as close as you can get. And maybe the lead that Richard has opened up in that desperate 2 corners is sufficient to give him the 2nd place in this race. Terry Shields is in front. Gibson now has dropped back a little bit. Whether he can close up again is fairly doubtful. I don't know that he can. And there's George Fury closing up. His teammate is right behind him. Richard's trying very hard. His tyres look to me as though they're going off.
Exactly. And in fact, they had a touch the last lap before that. It was only a minor one, not as significant as the one we've just seen. In the meantime, Jim Richards really does have his hands full containing, of course, Fred Gibson and now George Fury, who comes onto the scene. So the Turbo Nissans are certainly forced to be reckoned with at Amaru Park this afternoon. Meanwhile, the checkered flag is being prepared, and it's up as Terry Shield comes across the line to pick up a win. The scrap for 2nd continues. There you can see the gap that Shield put over 2nd as we wait for them to come into view.
It's close, Mike, it's close.
Checkered flag is ready, and who will it be? It's just Jim Richards with those snarling little Turbo Nissans led by Fred Gibson and George Fury getting up to place, of course, 3rd and 4th. Well, a mixture of some fascinating cars that we've seen in action today at Amaru Park, and what a final we're going to have with Terry Shield, Alan Grice, Jim Richards, and of course Kevin Bartlett and the Turbo Nissans. One of the better finals of the Better Break CRC Amscar Series here at Amaru Park this season. We'll take a break and return with more motor racing action from Amaru Park near Sydney.